Colorado, 2006. A young woman disappears on a crisp October night. Her sudden absence rattles a quiet community and leaves a trail of questions no one could answer. Neighbors locked their doors. Parents held their children closer. And for nearly 2 decades, her name echoed in living rooms, coffee shops, and police stations, always followed by the same haunting question: what really happened to Olivia Anderson? Year after year, detectives combed through leads, followed trails that ended in silence, and returned home with nothing but frustration. Olivia's family pleaded for answers, clinging to hope while the rest of the town sank into fear. Was she taken by a stranger? Did someone close to her hold the truth? Or had Olivia's life been stolen in a way no one dared imagine? It wasn't until 2023 that the silence finally cracked. An arrest stunned Colorado and sent shockwaves across the nation. Not only had detectives uncovered the truth, they discovered that the person responsible was someone no one in town had ever suspected. This is the story of Olivia Anderson, the mystery that haunted Colorado for 17 long years, and the shocking arrest that revealed the unthinkable. To understand the weight of this case, we first need to know who Olivia Anderson really was, because before she became the face on missing posters, before her name filled the news headlines, Olivia was just a young woman living in Fort Collins, Colorado. She was 24 years old, full of life, and with dreams that seemed endless. She had recently graduated from Colorado State University, earning a degree in environmental science, a field she was passionate about since high school. She often told her friends she wanted to make a difference, to protect the very landscapes that surrounded her hometown. Friends described Olivia as the kind of person who lit up a room. She had a warm laugh, a sharp mind, and a way of making people feel heard. At the time of her disappearance, she was working part-time at a local research lab while applying for graduate programs. She also volunteered on weekends, helping with wildlife conservation projects in the Rockies. People who knew her say she rarely wasted a moment of her day. Olivia's calendar was full, yet she always had time for her family and close friends. Olivia was especially close to her younger brother, Daniel, who looked up to her as both a sister and mentor. She often helped him with schoolwork, cheered for him at his soccer games, and promised to support him in college. To her parents, she was their pride, their firstborn who had set a shining example. To her friends, she was loyal, dependable, and always ready for a late-night talk or spontaneous road trip. And to the community, she was seen as a role model for young women, someone who balanced ambition with kindness. Outside of work and family, Olivia loved the outdoors. Hiking trails, weekend camping trips, and evenings by a campfire were her escape. She carried her camera everywhere, capturing sunsets, mountain peaks, and snapshots of friends laughing. These small pieces of her life would later become the images plastered across missing person flyers, the smiling young woman whose face stared back at thousands of people desperate to find her. Her future was wide open. Graduate school applications were almost finished. She had talked about moving to Oregon or Washington for work opportunities. There were hints of a new romance in her life. Though she kept details private, she had plans to travel, to see the world beyond Colorado. For Olivia Anderson, life was just beginning. October 14, 2006, it was a Saturday evening in Fort Collins, Colorado. The air was crisp, the kind of cool that reminded people winter was on its way. Olivia Anderson had spent the afternoon with friends at a small cave near the town square. They laughed, shared stories, and made plans for the weeks ahead. By all accounts, she seemed relaxed, cheerful, and in no hurry to leave. Around 9:45 p.m., Olivia hugged her friends goodbye and promised to text them when she got home. She stepped outside into the cool night air, walked toward her car parked just a few blocks away, and was never seen alive again. The timeline from that point becomes both clear and haunting. Her friends later told police she left alone. Witnesses remembered seeing her cross the street, her long brown coat swaying as she moved under the dim streetlights. She reached her silver sedan, unlocked the door, and drove off toward the southern edge of town. The route she took was familiar, a straight drive toward her home, but she never made it back. The first sign that something was wrong came the next morning. Olivia's mother noticed her bedroom light was still off, the bed untouched. At first, she thought Olivia might have stayed the night with a friend, but when hours passed and calls went unanswered, panic began to spread through the Anderson home. By noon, her parents contacted the police. That afternoon, a patrol unit spotted Olivia's car. It was parked at the entrance of a hiking trail just outside of town. The location made little sense. Olivia had not mentioned going hiking, and it was late at night when she was last seen. Detectives found the driver's side door unlocked. The engine was still warm, as if it had been driven there only shortly before discovery. On the passenger seat sat her purse, her wallet, and her phone, but there was no sign of Olivia Anderson. This discovery only deepened the fear. Her friends told investigators Olivia was not the kind of person to disappear without a word. She was reliable, careful, and always let people know where she was going. For her car to be abandoned, for her belongings to be left in plain sight, suggested something terrible had happened between the cave and that trailhead. As word spread through town, Olivia's family and friends organized search parties. Volunteers scoured the trail, calling her name through the dense woods, hoping for any trace. Flyers with her photo were printed and taped to shop windows, pinned to bulletin boards, and handed out at gas stations. Her smiling face, frozen in time, stared back at a community desperate for answers. The police quickly set up a command post near the trailhead. Dogs were brought in to follow her scent. Helicopters hovered overhead, sweeping the area with spotlights, but no clear trace was found. It was as if Olivia had walked into the night and vanished. As investigators interviewed residents living near the trail, one neighbor reported something unusual. Around 10:15 p.m., on the night Olivia disappeared, he noticed a dark pickup truck idling near the trail entrance. The engine was running, headlights off, as though waiting for someone. But when the neighbor glanced again minutes later, the truck was gone. That detail stuck with police, because no one in Olivia's circle owned such a vehicle. To detectives, the presence of that truck introduced a chilling possibility. Olivia may not have been alone at that trailhead. In those first 48 hours, every second counted. Detectives interviewed her friends from the cave, they questioned her coworkers and neighbors, they even reached out to her ex-boyfriend, who insisted he hadn't seen her in weeks, but each lead seemed to collapse under scrutiny. No signs of a struggle were found in the car, no footprints led away from the trailhead, and no one could explain why Olivia's car was left in a place she rarely visited at night. Meanwhile, her parents held on to hope. They gave interviews to local news stations, pleading for Olivia's safe return. They spoke directly into cameras, asking anyone with information to come forward. Tears streamed down their faces as they promised to never stop searching for their daughter. The footage aired across Colorado, sparking an outpouring of support and fear, because if Olivia Anderson could disappear on a familiar street in her hometown, then no one felt truly safe. Every phone call to the Anderson household became a moment of suspense. Each ring could have been Olivia, or someone who knew what happened to her, but as days turned to weeks, the calls brought only false leads, rumors, and cruel silence. Still, detectives clung to one unsettling image, that dark pickup truck near the trailhead. Who was driving it? Why were they there? And could they hold the key to what happened to Olivia Anderson? The search for Olivia Anderson quickly turned into one of the largest investigations Fort Collins had ever seen. Detectives began by retracing her last known steps. They interviewed her friends from the cave one by one again, asking the same questions again and again. Did she seem worried? Did she mention meeting anyone after? Was anyone following her that night? Each friend gave the same answer. Olivia had been in good spirits, laughing and joking. Nothing about her behavior suggested fear or concern. Investigators then turned their attention to those closest to Olivia. Her boyfriend at the time, Jason Miller, became the first person of interest. Jason was brought in for questioning less than 48 hours after Olivia's car was found. Detectives pressed him hard, pointing out inconsistencies in his timeline. Jason admitted they had argued earlier that week about her plans to move out of state, but he insisted he had nothing to do with her disappearance. Phone records placed him at his apartment across town during the critical hours. After days of scrutiny, Jason was eventually cleared. Still, the shadow of suspicion followed him, and whispers in town continued to paint him as guilty in the court of public opinion. With Jason off the list, detectives faced mounting pressure. The community wanted answers, and the Anderson family needed hope, but what they got instead were waves of anonymous tips. Calls poured into the department's hotline. Some claimed to have seen Olivia walking along the highway, others swore they spotted her in a gas station 2 towns away, a few insisted she had run off voluntarily, escaping to start a new life. Detectives chased down each lead, burning precious time and resources, only to find that every sighting was false. Olivia was nowhere to be found. Then came the stranger sightings. A few locals reported a tall man lingering near the cave on the night Olivia vanished. One bartender said he noticed someone staring at Olivia from across the room as she laughed with her friends. Another neighbor described a figure walking quickly behind her as she left the cave, but when investigators compared notes, the descriptions didn't match. One said the man was older. Another claimed he was in his 20s. None of the accounts aligned enough to build a profile. It was another dead end. The investigation stretched into weeks. Posters with Olivia's face lined every lamppost and bulletin board in town. Her family organized vigils, gathering hundreds of people in candlelight ceremonies. Friends held fundraisers to keep the search alive. National news picked up the story, broadcasting her photo across the country. For a brief moment, Olivia's name was on every television screen, yet, despite the growing attention, no concrete evidence surfaced. The trail remained cold. For detectives, the frustration was overwhelming. They combed through her phone records, emails, and bank accounts. Nothing unusual appeared, no suspicious messages, no withdrawals or purchases after the night she vanished. Olivia Anderson had simply disappeared, leaving no digital trace behind. Each piece of evidence only deepened the mystery rather than solving it. Inside the police department, tension mounted. Some detectives believed Olivia had been taken by someone she knew, pointing to her trusting nature and familiar routines. Others leaned toward the idea of a stranger, citing the witness who had reported the dark pickup truck at the trailhead. That vehicle became a central focus. Officers scoured registration databases, searching for matches. They knocked on doors, questioned truck owners, and checked surveillance cameras, but the truck remained a ghost, seen once, then gone. For Olivia's parents, the waiting became unbearable. They appeared regularly in front of the cameras, begging for answers. Her mother held Olivia's favorite scarf during interviews, clutching it as though it was the last piece of her daughter she had left. Her father, usually stoic, broke down more than once while speaking about the hole Olivia's absence left in their home. Their emotional pleas brought waves of community support, but no breakthrough. As the weeks bled into months, and months into years, hope began to fade. The vigils grew smaller, the news coverage moved on. Even within the police department, momentum slowed. Files piled high with tips, reports, and statements, but none provided the key they needed. For many, it felt like Olivia's case was slipping into the long list of unsolved disappearances. But just when detectives thought the trail had gone cold, a discovery miles away reignited the investigation. It was a moment no one expected, a moment that shifted the case in a completely new direction, and it would leave the entire community reeling. It had been nearly 2 decades since Olivia Anderson disappeared. The case that once consumed every headline had started to fade into the background. Her face still hung on posters around Fort Collins, but for many, hope was beginning to slip away. The Anderson family refused to give up, but even they admitted the silence was unbearable. Detectives continued to work the case, but behind closed doors, they had little more than stacks of dead-end reports. And then, on a cool March morning in 2003, 2 hikers set out for a weekend trek through the foothills west of town. Their plan was simple: a day of fresh air, far from the noise of the city. What they found instead would shake the entire community to its core. The hikers followed a narrow trail that wound between pine trees and jagged rock outcroppings. As they cut off the main path to rest near a clearing, one of them noticed something unusual. A patch of soil looked disturbed, as though the earth had been recently turned. At first, they thought it might be the work of animals, but then they saw a fragment of fabric sticking out from the ground, faded and dirt-stained. It didn't belong there. Their curiosity quickly turned to dread. They called authorities. Within hours, detectives and crime scene investigators arrived, sealing off the area. Slowly, carefully, the soil was removed, and then the truth emerged. Beneath that shallow grave lay the body of a young woman. The clothing matched what Olivia had been wearing the night she disappeared. Her jewelry was still intact, and days later, dental records confirmed what many had feared but no one wanted to believe. The remains were Olivia Anderson. The town of Fort Collins was shaken. For years, the possibility had lingered in the air, but confirmation hit like a thunderclap. Olivia had not run away, she had not chosen to disappear, she had been murdered. The autopsy revealed the cause of death: blunt force trauma to the head. There were no signs of prolonged struggle, no indication of robbery. Whoever had taken Olivia had ended her life quickly and left her in that shallow grave. For investigators, it was both a devastating blow and a critical turning point. The case was no longer a missing person, it was now a homicide. Fear gripped the town once again. Parents warned their children not to walk alone. Women who once felt safe jogging at dusk now stayed indoors. The discovery of Olivia's body reignited the case, and detectives knew they had one last chance to solve it before it faded forever. They combed the burial site for clues. Fibers, soil samples, and traces of biological material were collected and sent to the lab. And then came the detail that would change everything. Under Olivia's fingernails, forensic experts discovered skin cells, small fragments of DNA, likely left behind during a desperate attempt to fight back. It was a tiny clue, almost invisible to the naked eye, but it carried the potential to unmask the person responsible. The DNA sample was processed and entered into state and national databases. Days passed. Then, a match flashed across the system. Detectives leaned forward in their chairs as the results appeared. The DNA did not belong to a stranger, nor to any of the drifters or suspects they had once considered. It belonged to someone unexpected, someone from within the very community that had grieved for Olivia, someone who had attended vigils, offered condolences, and spoken of justice. The match stunned detectives. The DNA belonged to a man Olivia knew well, but trusted. His name was Michael Harris. Michael was 32 years old, a youth pastor at a local church. He was known for his calm presence, his uplifting sermons, and his work with troubled teens. Parents trusted him with their children. He organized weekend retreats, sports nights, and Bible study groups. For years, he had been a fixture in Fort Collins, a man people looked up to, and yet, the evidence pointed straight at him. The revelation was almost too much for the town to accept. Michael was the man who had organized prayer vigils for Olivia. He was the one who had stood beside her grieving parents, hands clasped, voice steady, promising that she would be found. He had comforted neighbors, spoken words of faith, and told Olivia's friends not to lose hope, and all the while, behind the scenes, detectives believed he was the very man responsible for her disappearance and death. At first, investigators questioned whether the DNA could be a mistake, but the sample had been tested, retested, and confirmed beyond doubt. To be certain, they dug deeper into Michael's life, peeling back layers of a man who presented himself as a leader but was hiding something very different beneath the surface. Police obtained a warrant to search Michael's home and his truck. What they found sent a chill through the investigative team. Fibers from Olivia's clothing were discovered in the back seat of his vehicle. Soil samples from his tires matched the terrain near the foothills where her body was found, and perhaps most damning, cell phone records placed Michael near the trailhead on the very night Olivia disappeared. The picture of Michael Harris as the kind, devoted pastor began to fracture. Investigators learned that outside of church walls, Michael's life was not as pure as it seemed. He struggled with gambling debts. He had a reputation, whispered quietly by some, for becoming overly attached to young women in his congregation. Those whispers had never grown loud enough to spark alarm, until now. Detectives built their case piece by piece. Surveillance footage placed Michael's truck near a gas station close to the trailhead, less than an hour before Olivia vanished. Witnesses recalled seeing a dark-colored vehicle in the area that matched his description, and then came the detail that left no room for doubt. In the glove compartment of his truck, investigators found a necklace. It was delicate, silver, with a small charm. Olivia's mother identified it instantly. It had belonged to her daughter. With evidence mounting, police moved in. On a gray April morning, neighbors watched in shock as squad cars surrounded Michael Harris's home. He stepped outside in his clerical shirt, Bible still in hand, confusion etched across his face. Officers placed him in handcuffs on the front lawn. As the entire block gathered to witness the unthinkable, some wept openly, others shouted in anger, a few refused to believe what they were seeing, insisting it had to be a mistake. The arrest sent shockwaves through Fort Collins. How could the same man who preached hope on Sundays, who prayed with the Anderson family, now stand accused of murdering their daughter? To the community, Michael had been a rock, a symbol of stability. To investigators, he was now the prime suspect in one of the most disturbing cases the town had ever seen. And yet, even as he was led away in handcuffs, Michael Harris maintained his innocence. He told officers, and later, the public, that he was being framed, that the evidence was flawed, that he had no reason to harm Olivia Anderson. His denial only deepened the mystery. Had detectives finally found their man? Or was there more to this story than anyone yet realized? The trial would reveal shocking truths, but before that day came, the town of Fort Collins had to reckon with the possibility that the man they trusted most may have been hiding a terrible secret all along. And still, one question remained unanswered. Why Olivia? Why would Michael Harris target a young woman who seemed to trust him? Investigators believed the answer lay buried in his double life, and what they uncovered next would leave everyone in disbelief. By the time Michael Harris was led into court, the community of Fort Collins had already been shaken to its core, but nothing compared to what was about to unfold inside that courtroom. For months, the case of Olivia Anderson had consumed the town, and now the trial promised to answer the questions that had haunted them since that autumn night in 2006. The prosecution wasted no time in laying out their case. they presented DNA evidence recovered from beneath Olivia's fingernails. It was a clear match to Michael Harris. Experts explained how the sample had been preserved, handled, and tested repeatedly, eliminating the possibility of error. Then came the physical evidence, the necklace found in his glove compartment, the fibers from Olivia's clothing inside his truck, the soil samples linking his tires to the burial site in the foothills. Piece by piece, the prosecution painted a chilling picture of what had happened that night, but the defense was just as determined. Michael's lawyers argued that the investigation had been flawed from the start. They claimed the DNA could have been transferred through innocent contact. They suggested the necklace may have been planted. They insisted the soil samples could have come from anywhere in Colorado. Their central argument was simple: Michael Harris was a respected pastor, with no history of violence, no criminal record, and no clear motive to harm Olivia Anderson. According to them, he was the victim of a rush to judgment, targeted because investigators had no one else to blame. The courtroom was packed every day of the trial. Olivia's family sat in the front row, their faces etched with pain and determination. Her mother clutched her daughter's photograph, unwilling to let go of the memory of the life taken from her. Friends and neighbors filled the seats behind them, desperate to see justice served. And yet, in another corner of the room, Michael's supporters sat quietly, refusing to believe the man they had trusted could have committed such a crime. The trial divided the town in ways no one could have imagined. Witness testimony proved to be some of the most emotional moments. Olivia's friends recalled her final evening, the laughter at the cave, the warmth in her voice, the plans she spoke of for the future. They remembered how she hugged them goodbye, never knowing it would be the last time. Investigators took the stand, walking the jury through every detail of their work, and then came the testimony that silenced the courtroom. A hiker who described stumbling upon the shallow grave, and the haunting image that would stay with him forever. But the most powerful testimony came from Olivia's parents. Her father, voice-breaking, described the agony of waiting by the phone for any word, holding on to hope long after others had given up. Her mother spoke of birthdays missed, empty chairs at holidays, and the pain of knowing her daughter's dreams had been stolen. Their words brought jurors to tears, and even hardened officers in the back of the courtroom struggled to keep their composure. The defense tried to counter with character witnesses, painting Michael Harris as a man of faith, a leader, someone incapable of violence. They pointed to his years of service, the prayers he had led, the youth he had mentored. They argued that the prosecution's story relied too heavily on circumstantial evidence, but as the weeks wore on, the weight of the forensic proof was difficult to deny. When closing arguments came, the prosecution asked the jury to look at the evidence, to think of Olivia's final moments, and to remember that justice demanded accountability. The defense pleaded for doubt, warning that convicting the wrong man would be a tragedy no less devastating than the crime itself. The jury deliberated for 3 days. Outside the courthouse, crowds gathered, waiting anxiously for a verdict. Inside, the Anderson family sat in silence, hands clasped, hearts racing, and then, at last, the words came: guilty, guilty of murder in the first degree. The sentence: life in prison without the possibility of parole. Michael Harris was led away in shackles, the same man who once stood in front of a congregation, now condemned to spend the rest of his life behind bars. For Olivia's family, the verdict brought a measure of closure, but not relief. No sentence could bring back their daughter. For the community of Fort Collins, the trial left scars that would not easily heal. Neighbors who had once prayed together now struggled to look each other in the eye. Parents who had trusted Michael with their children questioned how they had missed the signs. Some felt betrayed, others enraged, and many simply heartbroken. The church that Michael had once led fell silent, attendance dwindled, trust was shattered, and throughout the town, one name remained on everyone's lips: Olivia Anderson. Her story became more than a tragedy. It became a warning, a reminder that even in the most familiar places, darkness can hide in plain sight. And yet, as the courtroom emptied, one question still lingered: had the full truth really been uncovered? Or were there still secrets buried with Olivia Anderson that no verdict could ever bring to light? The verdict brought the Anderson family something they had long prayed for: answers. For nearly 17 years, they had lived with a hole in their lives, searching for signs, begging for closure. Now, though Olivia could never return home, at least the truth had been spoken in open court. They visited her grave often, leaving flowers, speaking to her memory, and promising that she would never be forgotten. Yet even with justice served, the scars remained. Every birthday that passed, every holiday marked by her absence, reminded them of what had been taken. Across Fort Collins, healing did not come easily. This was not just the loss of one life, it was the betrayal of trust on a scale few could comprehend. People asked themselves the same haunting question: how could someone who prayed with families, who stood before crowds offering words of comfort, also be capable of such cruelty? Parents who once looked to Michael Harris for guidance now felt anger, shame, and confusion. Friends who defended him early in the investigation quietly admitted they would never see the world the same way again. The community gathered for vigils in Olivia's honor long after the trial ended. Streets were lined with candles, and her name echoed in church halls, schools, and homes. Her story became part of Colorado's history, a reminder that justice is possible, but never simple. Teachers spoke of her kindness, classmates remembered her laughter, and her family carried forward her dreams, determined that her life would be remembered for more than tragedy. In the years that followed, the town rebuilt itself slowly. Trust was not easily restored, but conversations changed. People became more cautious, more aware, and perhaps more protective of those around them. The case of Olivia Anderson left behind a legacy, both of heartbreak and of resilience. It showed how a community could break, but also how it could come together in pursuit of truth. And yet, as time passed, an uneasy shadow remained. People often wondered if the full story had truly been told. Did Michael Harris act alone? Were there warning signs that everyone missed? Questions lingered, whispered quietly at gatherings, spoken in hushed tones in the very church he once led. No matter how firmly the verdict stood, there was a sense that pieces of the puzzle might forever remain hidden. For nearly 2 decades, Colorado held its breath, and when the truth finally came out, it was darker than anyone ever imagined. Olivia Anderson's name is still spoken today, not only as the victim of a crime that stunned a town, but as a reminder that behind every headline is a life, a family, and a story that deserves to be told. In Fort Collins, her memory endures, and though justice was delivered, the echoes of her story still linger, reminding us that some wounds never truly heal. And now, the question passes to you: do you believe justice was truly served in this case, or do you think there are still pieces missing from the story? If you had lived in Olivia's town back in 2006, when the fear was fresh and the mystery unsolved, what would you have done? Would you have joined the searches? Would you have trusted the man who stood at the pulpit every Sunday, never knowing what secrets lay behind his smile? Your voice matters. Share your thoughts in the comments below, because every perspective adds to the conversation, and every question keeps the memory of Olivia alive. And if stories like this capture your attention, if you want to hear more cases that shook towns and shattered lives, make sure you subscribe. Don't miss the next story, one that is even more chilling, and perhaps even closer to home than you might expect. See you in the next video.